Well, it's time now for my Sunday morning monthly arts roundup. We're going to take a tour around some interesting events happening across the UK in November, and I'm joined by Sharuna Sagar. Sharuna presents and reports for BBC Look North. She's the programme's arts and entertainment reporter. Back in 2014, she was shortlisted for a prestigious RTS award for Presenter of the Year. Sharuna, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Sarah.
Oh, it's great to have you. And you've selected some really fantastic highlights for us. We're starting with something that's happening in Durham between the 14th and 17th of November, the Lumiere Festival, celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. So what makes this festival so special?
I really love this festival. It is really the most beautiful festival of light. I mean, Durham is a really gorgeous city anyway, but just imagine the whole place is brought alive by weird and wonderful light installations all around the city, in all the nooks and crannies, in the most obvious spaces, and also it allows you to explore little alleyways and parts of the city that you wouldn't normally look at. And it's just so great for the families that come along. The children are just mesmerised, as are the adults actually, and it's terribly romantic as well. If you go a bit later on in the evening, because it's open till 11 at night, so when all the crowds have gone, you just walk along the River Wear and you walk along the cobbled streets. It's just the most beautiful festival.
And it's lovely that now, of course, it gets dark so early so that the little ones can go along at 4:30, can't they? And then grown-ups can go along later if you want to miss the kids.
But yeah, and they get to see art installations that have been made by some of the world's top light artists, and some are homegrown, some come from very far-flung places, and they create interesting experimental artworks, and they are specially commissioned for this event a lot of the time. So it really is the most magical festival.
I mean, I've seen photographs of things like the Fogscape by Fujiko Nakaya and Simon Corder. That looks absolutely fantastic, all this fog around the River Wear. Actually, there's something based around the river that you were particularly enamoured by.
Well, my favourite installation, which I understand is coming back this year, so I'm really excited about it, is a whale projection, and it's just amazing. You really think there is a whale in the River Wear, and I was so stunned when I saw it, because I was looking around thinking, how are they doing this? How are they projecting this onto the water in the dark?
Amazing.
And it looks like a whale's tail is flicking in the light. It's just great.
There's just some gorgeous things happening, and I thought we would have some music now celebrating light, and this is by a man with a wonderful name, actually, Harold Darke. He was a distinguished church organist, and we're going to hear his anthem, "O Gladsome Light." It's sung by Durham Cathedral Choir, suitably enough, directed by James Lancelot. Oh, Gladsome Lights by Harold Darke. James Lancelot conducted Durham Cathedral Choir. We were talking about Durham, of course. The Lumiere Festival opens on the 14th of November in Durham, runs till the 17th of November. Is the cathedral quite an important part of the festival, Sharuna?
Oh, absolutely. It has a main role every year, and it's lit up with a giant animation all across the facade, the front of the building, and it's moving around. It's just brilliant. I cannot stress enough how brilliant this festival is. So I really think you should go along this year.
I want to go. I really do want to go. Sounds absolutely marvellous. Well, Sharuna, your next choice takes us to the National Gallery in London. This is a project, an exhibition, you could say, that runs from the 9th of November up to the 12th of January. This is Leonardo Experience a Masterpiece. So why did this one catch your eye?
Well, the whole idea of an immersive experience, I think, is really interesting to see how an art gallery or a museum has decided to show the work. And the team behind this particular exhibition is the team that brought us the David Bowie Is exhibition, which was phenomenally successful. I loved that. And also they were behind the 2012 Olympic ceremony. So, you know, it's going to be something special when you know who's involved. And I recently reported on a Van Gogh immersive experience in York, where you sat in a church space and his paintings were projected all around you and animated and brought to life with a soundtrack. And it was a really beautiful way to get inside the head of the artist. So I think that this is going to be a very interesting exhibition, because what they're doing is they're going to concentrate on one particular painting, the Virgin of the Rocks, and they're going to explore it using all the latest technology, animation, projection, lights, and whatever they've got at their disposal to kind of bring it to a wider audience, which is what I think these kind of experiences are trying to do.
It's just such a fantastic way of bringing science and conservation and art all together, isn't it? And Leonardo was not just a painter, of course. He was the archetypal Renaissance man, a great inventor and a musician too. And we have some music connected to him now, and I can't wait to hear what you think of this, Sharuna, because it's from an album called La Viola Organista by the Ensemble Musica Antigua. And this is centred around an instrument which Leonardo designed but was only made recently. It was a combination of a keyboard instrument and a stringed instrument. If you pressed a key on the keyboard, this caused a friction belt to vibrate individual strings. So we're going to get to hear one now. So here's a piece by Heinrich Isaac. It's called La Morra. It's played by Musica Antigua, directed by Eduardo Paniagua.
What a really interesting sound. It's subtle, but yet really complex at the same time. You know what really blows my mind, Sarah, is the fact that this was just one of thousands of ideas that Leonardo da Vinci came up with, made designs for, and, wrote in his copious notebooks and never bothered to build. And if he had built this instrument in his lifetime, it could have changed the course of modern music, couldn't it?
It certainly could, yeah. The viola organista, the instrument we're talking about, and in that recording, Eduardo Paniagua was directing Musica Antigua. So we heard not only the viola organista, which in that recording was made by the Japanese instrument maker Akio Obuchi. We also heard the vihuela and percussion and portative organ as well. The exhibition Sharuna was talking about, Leonardo Experience, a masterpiece, is taking place at the National Gallery in London from the 9th of November to the 12th of January. Well, Sharuna, your next choice takes us to Stratford, something very different. You've chosen such a wide variety of things for us. And the musical opening on the 8th of November, The Boy in a Dress. So why did this appeal to you, The Boy in a Dress?
Well, anyone who has children will be familiar with this book. It was written by David Williams, who is, yes, the comedian from Little Britain, but he's actually becoming more famous now as a hugely successful children's author. So the Royal Shakespeare Company have been looking for a show, a Christmas show, and following in the footsteps of Matilda. And they have decided to make this book their new show. Actually, it's been development for about 6 years. And it's just a wonderful little book. And it's essentially about a schoolboy who wants to wear dresses to school. And it's to help him cope with the death of his mother. And it's just a feel-good, family-friendly musical, and I think it'll appeal to many generations. And what is a real coup for the Royal Shakespeare Company is that they've managed to get Robbie Williams and Guy Chambers, his long-term writing partner, to collaborate on the music. So they've got, David Williams, who wrote the story, the Royal Shakespeare Company doing the production, and Robbie Williams and Guy Chambers doing the music. It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
It is, yeah, fantastic ingredients. And I was really excited to see Gregory Doran talking about this, the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, because he was a former guest on the Essential Classics programme on Radio 3. And I saw that Greg takes credit for reintroducing the dog into the musical. So that is obviously another great thing, having a dog as well as all this great music and a fantastic story. Well, I thought we'd hear some music connected to the Royal Shakespeare Company now. It's a recording by the Orchestra of the Swan, who've been based in Stratford for nearly 25 years. They often work with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So here they are playing a movement from a Dowland Suite by John Ireland. David Curtis conducting the orchestra of the Swan in a Dowland Suite by John Ireland, arranged for string orchestra. We've been talking about The Boy in a Dress on at the Royal Shakespeare Company from the 8th of November. Sharuna Sagar, would Shakespeare have approved of that, do you think?
It's a comedy about cross-dressing. Of course, he would have loved it. And he probably would have liked the music as well, you know, with old Robbie Williams in there.
Absolutely. Indeed. Well, Sharuna, tell us about your next choice, because this is all about the jazz quintet Ezra Collective. What are they up to?
Well, don't let the jazz tag put you off for a start. Ezra Collective are considered a pioneering new wave jazz group, and they are being credited for reviving the London jazz scene and possibly redefining it. So they have lots of influences in their music. It's not what your dad would think of as jazz, you know. It's grime, soul, hip hop, rap, reggae, ska, Afrobeat. It's literally everything in there. It's a big melting pot, but obviously jazz underpins it all, and they've got a really distinctive groove. And they're going on tour, basically, and it's to follow on from their long-awaited debut LP, which was released earlier this year, and that was called You Can't Steal My Joy. And they're doing incredibly well on tour.
I think it's a great title because there is something very joyful about their music. And when I was listening to a bit of the album, it reminded me a bit of late Miles Davis, which probably polarised people. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I love that similarly rhythmic feel in their music. I think we should hear a little now. So this is a track from an EP of theirs. This is from an earlier EP, and it's called Juan Pablo. This track is The Philosopher. That's part of The Philosopher from the EP Juan Pablo by Ezra Collective, the five-piece jazz group. They're touring around the UK from the 19th to the 30th of November. So lots of opportunities to catch them, including Leeds, Brighton, Glasgow, Bristol, Manchester, Nottingham and London. Sharuna Sagar is still with me. We're ending our November tour of cultural picks with a documentary from the BBC iPlayer archives. This is something we'll be doing regularly here on Sunday morning. It is an absolute treasure trove. Some of the greatest arts programmes of the past few decades. And Sharuna, you've chosen something that is pure gold, an episode of Comic Roots. This is a series from the early 1980s looking at the foundations of how comics developed their humour. In this episode from 1983, Kenneth Williams explores the area he grew up in, St Pancras, London. Why were you drawn to this one?
This is the most brilliant little documentary. It is immediately captivating. It just starts off with him in a pub leading a sing-along with all the Cockneys, and that becomes a recurring theme throughout the documentary. It's only 30 minutes long, and he gets to do a lot of talking to camera, really intimate chats. Like you're the viewer. You feel, as the viewer, you feel as though he's talking directly to you. Plus, he engages with local people, with children. Lots of fabulous anecdotes. He does all the voices, male and female. It's just brilliant. He's such an amazingly engaging raconteur and storyteller, and it's a bit vaudeville, and you hear all these lovely little stories about his childhood and his mum, and the risque stories, the things that his gran said, the things that his mum says, and he does all the voices. I absolutely love this.
Yes, his mother obviously had a very strong influence on his very cheeky sense of humour. That was one of my favourite bits of the
Absolutely,
film. Yeah. Just wondering, did you grow up on carry-on films? I mean, I think I remember sort of not really being allowed to watch them, but somehow watching them anyway.
I think my parents didn't really take much notice, and I think they just left me to it in front of a TV. Yeah. So I just remember watching them all through my childhood. At the weekend, they'd just play them, wouldn't they, every weekend in the afternoons. I just feel like I've grown up on them. And, when I think of carry-on films, I think the first one I think of is Carry On Camping. When Kenneth Williams plays the teacher doing the morning exercise in the campsite, and he's doing the flinging in, and then Barbara Windsor's bra, her bikini top flies off, and he looks at Matron and he says, "Matron, take them away." And I just love it. It's so camp. It's so cheeky. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I once saw Kenneth Williams walking along Riding House Street, not far from Broadcasting House, in exactly the same sort of gliding fashion as we see in the documentary. And I realise now, actually, that when I saw him, it must have been in the 4 months before he very sadly died in 1988. But I feel rather lucky to have seen him.
You should have said hello.
I wish
he would
I
have
had.
loved it. He loved chatting to people. That's what came across in the documentary.
It did. I should have said hello. Sharuna Sagar, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. It's been so enjoyable going through your arts events. And I think we should celebrate the comic art of Kenneth Williams now. It's a hilarious song which gives his genius chance to take flight. It's called the Lute Song, featuring singer Heather Linson. She is performing a seemingly innocent and charming old song with frequent interruptions.
It was a lass went down the lane in lilac time, she went to meet her silly swain to pass the time. She picked herself a hazel twig, a holly sprig, a purple fig. She found herself some roses fine to pass the time. She plucked the rounded fruit that grew around her way. She found a bank of harebells blue, and down she lay.
Really?
And there she met a hornet's snail, a pair of quail, a lonely whale,
That's dead.
and peacock feathers bright and gay, with which to play.
Oh, it's outrageous, isn't it?
Outrageous?
Yes, absolutely disgusting.
Why?
It's obscene.
What's obscene about
The
it?
whole thing.
She plucked the rounded fruit that grew around her way. What's obscene about that?
It's absolutely revolting.
Well, what does it remind you of?
The birds and the bees, if you'd like to put it that way.
What?
Yes.
And there she met a hornet's nest,
Ooh.
a pair of quail, and a lonely whale. Well, what's wrong with that?
The same thing.
Oh, don't be ridiculous. and peacock feathers bright and gay with which to play. It's bright and colourful and beautiful. Well, what does that remind you of?
The same thing again.
But why?
Everything does.
Oh, he's so cheeky. Heather Linson and Kenneth Williams with the Lute Song. That's from the album Curtain Calls. The documentary Sharuna chose for us is available on the BBC iPlayer. It's an episode of Comic Roots from 1983, Series 2, Number 4.